So you're joining us on Ask the Doctor. I'm with an amazing doctor. Dr. Dan Maggs, how are you?
Very well, Steve, how are you?
You're looking great, mate. You're looking great.
Thank you.
Keeping that weight off?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good man, good man. So we're going to dive straight into your questions, because in this hour, we've got even more than normal, because we're trying to try and fit more in. And some of the questions are amazing, so thank you for sending these in. If you want to know how to send your questions in, go to primalcure.com. The footer of the website, it says Ask the Doctor. You send your questions in and we'll try and answer them the week after. But we do get hundreds and hundreds. So if you're worried about something that you think you should be seeking doctor's advice, please go to your GP. Don't wait for Ask the Doctor program for your solutions, or go to the pharmacy, or whatever you think you should be doing. Just go and do that. Don't wait for us, is the thing I'm trying to say. But we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. So let's start with our first question. This is from, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Zahida. Zahida says, would you be able to provide me with advice on how to treat an itchy scalp? I have spots which are causing excess hair loss due to clogging the follicles. Crikey, she seems to know what she's talking. Teach me a few things. Currently, I've tried using a really well-known brand of shampoo and toner for itchy scalp, but unfortunately, the problem still has not rectified itself. I tend to wash my hair every other day in order to ease my condition, but haven't noticed any difference. So the question is, I guess, what causes an itchy scalp? What can we be doing to avoid it?
Okay, right, yeah. So a number of things cause an itchy scalp, right through from, I think we start with the kind of medical things and then talk about kind of, you know, stuff that's going into shampoos and stuff that might not be really helping the situation. So from a medical perspective, things like eczema, things like psoriasis, particularly fungal infections that would affect the hair as well. Those things are all very, very common causes. And I think, you know, this question about, you know, something blocking follicles and things like that, you know, I'd want to see that as a doctor just to find out what that is really. Yeah. And, you know, we sometimes we need to see things directly, and so your doctor could have a look at those. You know, you mentioned hair loss as well, which, you know, maybe there may be a fungal infection going on there, and sometimes you need, you know, actual tablet medication to help cure itchy scalps rather than just you know, creams and lotions and potions and stuff, which actually can be really difficult to apply to the hair as well. And that's one of the problems we have. You know, if you've got a rash on your skin, it's pretty easy to, first of all, see it, and second of all, put cream on it and stuff. But, you know, some of these ointments and stuff, you know, really gloopy and horrible, and you don't want to be putting them in your hair. So, you know, there are lots of different things that it could be. Sometimes we have to send scrapings of the hair off to the laboratory to try and see if there's actual fungi there that need some sort of medical treatment, really. So first thing I've learned from you, Dan, is that there's more than one reason. You know, itchy scalp isn't just, oh, you've got an itchy scalp, it's caused by X. There's 2 or 3 possible causes. Yeah. So I mean, if you think about things that cause itching on your own skin, you know, dry skin, obvious one. Eczema can cause itchy skin, psoriasis, itchy, flaky skin. You know, any number of things. You know, a localized infection might be uncomfortable and painful, and also itchy as well. So yeah, it could be any of those things really. But I think, and so some of the medicated shampoos may be appropriate as well. But you know, that's probably something else that you can try if other things aren't working. And also, but then again, what happens when all of this stuff isn't working really? Is it something, you know, in your shampoo that's causing, you know, toxicity? Or, you know, she mentions that she washes her hair every other day. You know, our scalp produces natural oils. The hair follicles produce natural oils. Are we washing away those natural oils too often? So another thing might be to look at the choice of shampoo. And another thing after that might be looking at the frequency of washing, because, you know, is every other day washing your hair with stuff that's really stripping away all the natural oils and stuff, too much really, and actually once a week to be washing their hair for people with scalp problems isn't too infrequent really.
Yeah, and so it's a really interesting question. Of course, I'll give you the Primal view on this. Go back thousands of years. Did Primal man wash his hair? Of course he didn't, because they just didn't. It's a fairly new phenomenon to wash our hair in terms of evolution. And what happened about 120 years ago when they started to market shampoos and soaps, they found that the more you could make it foam, the more you could make it volumized, the more they sold. So they started adding more and more chemicals, and eventually it became not so much how the hair was getting shinier or cleaner or more appealing to look at. It was about the experience of shampooing. What was it feeling like? How much could you make it foam? The more you could make it foam, the more people seemed to buy the products. So more chemicals were needed, more chemicals went in. So the last thing going back 100 odd years, the last thing anybody thought about was hair health or scalp health. It was about how do you sell more products. Sadly, there's an element of that in many shampoos still today. They might inject a little bit of this and a little bit of that may help, and make a marketing claim good for the hair. There's something they actually call vitamin H, which actually isn't vitamin H for hair, but actually isn't vitamin H at all. It's one of the vitamin Bs. Shampoos, the type of shampoo you use, I would say if you've got a problem, try and find a shampoo. Of course, we have a solution ourselves at Primal. Try and find a shampoo with no nasties, chemicals, anything added, 100% natural, and try that. But I would first of all agree totally with Dan. You should cut back the amount of times you wash your hair, cut it right back. If you go a whole week, it's a bit like when maybe you've got IBS, or maybe you've got a small problem in the stomach, that to try and find out what it is that's causing you. There's a dozen foods you should cut right back on. In fact, just take out the diet for a week or two to see if the IBS goes away, and if it goes away, start adding one type of food and another type of food back into your diet, till you can actually diagnose what it is that's causing the problem. Same with the hair. Try not to wash it for a week, see what happens. Then maybe introduce a totally natural shampoo and see if the problem's gone away. And then, if it's gone away, maybe you really love brand XYZ, go back to using brand XYZ and see what happens. And eventually you might be able to identify the problem. But I think what was great from Dr. Dan was that there are several medical conditions. Question I seem to be asking all the time of yourself and Shan: somebody's got an itchy scalp, straight to the GPs, try these things first, or is it something the pharmacy can help with?
Yeah, I think it is in the first instance something a pharmacist can help with. I mean, we look at things like eczema and psoriasis as whole body disorders and stuff really. So have you suffered with eczema before? Have you got eczema somewhere else? Have you got psoriasis or plaques of psoriasis somewhere else? Then that may be something that you might need to go and see your doctor about, because you're already known to have those conditions. So yeah, but I think in the first instance it's probably something a pharmacist could have a look at, and they'll probably recommend some of the medicated shampoos that have got antifungals in and things like that, if that's appropriate, and then can advise to go off and see your GP afterwards.
I'm going to ask you one final question on this, and if you don't know the answer, just say I don't know. Is this a modern problem caused by modern ways of living? Do we know whether this is a problem that's existed for 100 years, or is this just something to do with our modern life? Well,
we certainly know that just take eczema for example, we certainly know that there's certainly an association between increased use of cleaning products and the tendency to develop what we call atopic conditions, so things like eczema, asthma, and those kind of things. So I think from that, and we're certainly seeing a rise in those kind of conditions. So yeah, I think so. I think it probably is more of a modern disease. Autoimmune diseases like psoriasis, are we damaging our gut health? Is there something going on there why we're seeing an increase in those conditions? So yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, I'm not going to stake my registration on it, but I think these probably are.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I love the answer, because what I was just going to come back to and say, yeah, it is probably some way a lot of this to do with modern living. Let's get back to being a bit more primal. Can we end that one there? I think great answer from you. Thank you very much for that question. I hope that answered it for Zahida. So the next question we have is from Sharon. A member of my family was diagnosed with Parkinson's at the age of 65. Their mother, which would therefore be Sharon's grandmother, was also diagnosed with Parkinson's much later in life. I have 2 questions, says Sharon. First question, is Parkinson's generic stroke hereditary? And in brackets she said, I'm not sure the difference between the two, so maybe we can cover that for you. I've heard that they are researching more into whether Parkinson's originates from the gut before affecting the brain. Is this to do with a leaky gut? And is there anything I can do to lessen my chances of getting Parkinson's? There's like 4 or 5 questions in there, but it all comes around Parkinson's. Is it hereditary? And I suppose whether it's hereditary or not, is there anything we can do to lessen our chances of getting it?
Okay, so the first question was, is it genetic or hereditary? I don't know the difference between the two. Okay, so genetic and hereditary, pretty much the same thing. It's an inherited condition, but we don't necessarily, it's not like, there's certain diseases where there's a really strong inheritance pattern through generations. Cystic fibrosis, for example. We know that, you know, if both parents are carriers of the cystic fibrosis gene, that 50% of their children, I think that's correct, I need to work that out and draw the graphs out, will develop
a higher probability.
Okay? But with things like, you know, Parkinson's disease, it's not quite so, you know, obvious but it's certainly more likely that if your parent or aunt and uncle have had it, then that you will develop it than the general population. Okay, so there is a genetic component, but we also think there's probably environmental components as well to it. So those also factor in. So things that have been, you know, associated with it rather than we know cause it, things like certain pesticide uses and things like that. We also know that things like the amount of exercise you do is also associated with development of Parkinson's disease, but it's not known to be completely causal. So that, you know, it does run in families, but there are other things that can cause it, and it's certainly not a case that if your mother had it, that you will definitely get it. It's not quite that clear a link.
I think the way I summarise this, most diseases, for want of a better word, around the brain, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and so on and so forth. It's back to this thing when you see a whole family that are obese or overweight, and a lot of people say, well, it's in the genes, mum and dad was overweight, therefore I'm overweight. It's kind of proven that it's very unlikely when it comes to weight, for example, that it's in the genes or that it's hereditary. But the fact that you see entire families are overweight, it is more to do with the same circumstances. Exactly what you just said, you know, same exposure to pesticides, same exposure to certain diets, the same way of living and lifestyles and so on and so forth. And the way I always look, and my mother's got Alzheimer's, so this is something I've studied a lot, is that, and I got this from another book and then I quoted it in my book, because most of my book is all about Primal, so there is nothing new, it's just about putting the jigsaw together. The way I was explained it, it's kind of like, let's just say there's a small increased risk of getting something like Parkinson's or like Alzheimer's. Maybe there is a small DNA risk increase of getting it. But the way it was described to me, it's kind of like the gun's loaded, you've got more chance, but something still has to pull that trigger. And that trigger is your environment, your lifestyle, what you eat, how you exercise, the pesticides, etc., that you're exposed to. So sorry to jump in there, but I'm totally with you on that one with both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. There may be a slightly small increase of risk, but if you live healthily and try and eat the right things and, you know, get out and walk and exercise and try and avoid those chemicals in hair products and shampoos and all the things that we talk about, then the likelihood is you can be absolutely fine. Anyway, there's me jumping in on Ask the Doctor, sorry.
That's all right.
So I think we've answered, is Parkinson's genetic hereditary? Maybe a slightly increased chance, but like you can almost mitigate that by lifestyle.
Yeah, so I mean, some point you can only do as best you can do. There's a certain amount of increased risk because of that, but yes, I think it doesn't, you know, we'll talk about, you know, ways to prevent it and stuff in the third part of the question, but yeah, certainly I think part of that comes down to all the good living that we promote here, really.
Yep. I'm gonna deliberately pause for a few seconds because you're watching this probably on television, but we also cut these up and put them on the web to answer people's questions, so we can divide that into 2 questions. There was the answer to, hopefully, is Parkinson's hereditary or genetic. Let's break the question into 2. Second part, I've heard they are researching more into whether Parkinson's originates from the gut before affecting the brain. Is this to do with a leaky gut? And is there anything I can do to lessen my chances of getting Parkinson's, says Sharon.
Okay, so honestly, I don't know. There's so many different places around the world, so many different laboratories at so many different universities, and probably within pharmaceutical companies as well, that are looking into all different causes. Certainly a huge growth area in terms of scientific discovery and stuff has been all about the gut, but whether it's any specifics to do with that, I'm not sure really. So I don't know, have you come across anything about Parkinson's?
Yes and no. So I believe, let's just do some facts, and maybe some new facts that maybe you've not heard before. The amount of bacteria in our gut outweighs the weight of our brain. We know that when we're inside the womb, the two things that develop first are the brain and the gut. We know there's this massive sort of highway between the gut and the brain. That's why we talk of things like getting the butterflies, gut feelings, and so on and so forth. And I think science is about to reveal, by the way, this is one of the most complicated area of science, full stop period, because it's, you know, we're talking trillions of different bacteria. We think talking about thousands and tens of thousands of different strains of bacteria in our gut. All I would say, and in fact, go back thousands of years, Hippocrates said that, you know, all illnesses start in the gut. And now many doctors are agreeing that most illnesses start in the gut. So it's certainly going to be a really good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, if you're trying to avoid, you know, look, what are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid everything, aren't we? We're trying to avoid anything that shortens our life or shortens the amount of quality of life that we've got. So we want to live longer, but we also, there's no point in living longer if, you know, we're not able to enjoy it. So it doesn't really matter what we're trying to avoid, whether it's Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes. It doesn't really matter what we've got to try and avoid them all. And I would say that many, many more things, in my opinion, start in the gut than we'll ever, well, maybe my lifetime will ever realise. Do I believe that Parkinson's, Alzheimer's start in the gut? Yeah, personally I do, but I'm not a doctor. And therefore I would be doing everything I could to look after the gut in the terms of cutting down the carbohydrates, exercising more. In fact, I was watching a great little clip on YouTube a couple of days ago, and they were saying, for example, if you took DNA cells from 100 people and just took the DNA cells, the human cells, they could, with about 60% accuracy, tell you if that person was obese or slender. 60%, so not very accurate at all. They could take bacteria from the stomach from the same 100 people, and with over a 90% accuracy from the type of bacteria in the stomach, tell you whether that person was obese or slender. So basically, this, if we join those the last two questions together, is it genetic, and what part does the gut have to play in it? Well, the genetics of the DNA, the human cells, has less to play on most of things around things like being slender and overweight than even the actual types of bacteria you've got in the body. So there's just so much more happening in our gut than we know at the moment. And as a layman who's just done lots and lots of research on this area, and in particular Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, I think yes, the gut has a huge part to play in our overall mortality and health, and specifically with areas of relating to the brain.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we think of is, well, you know, if we're just finding different bacteria in the gut and looking at those and seeing if it's related to different diseases, and unfortunately it's just not as simple as that really, because, you know, we've got this genetic code and we talk about the genetic code, but it's really just a blueprint, and actually your body has to go and read that genetic code and produce proteins off the back of that, which, you know, affect everything. And one of the things we're looking at is how the gut and the genetics interact, and that's why it's such a complicated area. It's not just as easy as saying, you know, we've got this pattern of gut bacteria, so therefore it must cause this, because there's so many different intertwining things that are going on within the human body. It's so complicated that actually, you know, it's unraveling all that and developing the complicated scientific systems to deal with that, which are just mind-bogglingly complicated that is really going to be where we're going with science over the next kind of 20, 30 years, and where we have been going up to this point. But yeah, I'm very excited to see what comes out of that. But I think we've got to be very, very careful to kind of make simple judgments out of it, because there's just so many, the microbiome and the genome and the epigenome and stuff that's all interacting together. It's a really complicated area of science. It's
really complicated, and we can't answer the question. Yes, it is about leaky guts and gut health, but the more you can do, I want to say something I said literally a minute ago, is what we're after. We're after trying to avoid all diseases and live longer and healthier. Therefore, look after the gut, and hopefully that'll be one thing you can do to, stop the likelihood of getting Parkinson's. Right, next question. Nice short one from June. Why is it suggested that you take folic acid in pregnancy? Asks June.
Cool. Yeah, okay, this is a good question. Basically, folic acid is important in the development of our nervous system, okay? And one of the early things that develops, in pregnancy is the nervous system. And we know that whilst you can get most of your folic acid from food, that increased need during pregnancy, we generally don't meet through diet alone, okay? So we recommend supplementation in the few months when you're trying to conceive, or if you have not been taking it as soon as you know that you're pregnant, because you need that increased amount of folic acid for good function and creation of the spinal cord and that. And really, it's one of the real successes of public health interventions is there's far fewer children born with spina bifida, which is the neural tube defect, which is very important. Folic acid is very important in preventing. So folic acid during pregnancy, very, very important. I think it's 400 micrograms is the recommended dose, but there are certain groups of people who should be taking more than that, particularly if you've got a family history of things like spina bifida, particularly if you're on certain anti-epileptic medications, particularly if you're diabetic as well, then we actually increase that to 5 milligrams, which is a whole lot more, really. But yeah, so if you have one of those conditions, it's definitely worth seeking advice from your doctor about pregnancy and conception and folic acid. But yeah, it's really, really important, and a great success of public health actually that recommending folic acid has cut down massively on spina bifida.
And let's remember, folic acid is a vitamin, so one of the B vitamins, and the word vit, it actually comes from the word vital for life. So, it's just another example of why we all should be making sure, A, we try and get as much nutrition and good quality nutrition through our food. And remember, normally the carbohydrates, the pastas, the rice, potatoes aren't associated with a lot of vitamins. You've got to look for your vegetables, you've got to look at other your fruit, your veg, and so on and so forth. And top that up, always that insurance policy with a good multivitamin, but absolutely 100%. And that's why we see this as a standalone vitamin as well. So you can get your multivitamin. The reason you see a lot of folic acids separately is exactly as Dr. Dan has just said, different dosages of it depending on family history and so on and so forth. Yeah. Nice to have a nice, short, sharp question for you. I hope you enjoyed that one. Well, in fact, the next one is just as short, I think. Somebody called Steve, not me, has asked this question. At what age should I be getting a prostate exam? I'm going to ask you that in a second because it is asked the doctor. I'll tell you when I started having it, based on the advice I got. I was mid-30s. I don't know what the record. I think it's actually a bit later, but we'll find out in a moment. And once you get past the what's the word? The stigma of it. I had my annual medical only a week ago, and it just now becomes just like anything. Once you get used to it, you just get used to it. And also, when I used to work for Colon Cancer Concern, I remember being the person that came up with that advertising slogan, don't blush, look before you flush. And we've just, as guys, we've got to get over sometimes this stigma of, your health has to come first, and sometimes you do have to do some things that maybe might not sound that pleasant, but you should take your health seriously. And it's an interesting question because the more you speak to Malcolm Kendrick, people like that say, actually we can examine too much, and if we over-examine, then we end up on medication when we might not need it, and so on and so forth. But I think this is one area, I can't wait to get your answer on this one, Dr. Dan. I think it's one area where maybe we should be doing the exams.
Yeah, I don't think the answer is going to be as short as you think it's going to be actually with this one. So there's no national screening program for prostate cancer. So we don't, so breast cancer, colon cancer, we've started to see one coming in, cervical cancer, there's all these screening programs. And actually, so for a screening program to be effective, it's got to be shown to be safe, and that we're not over-diagnosing people, okay? So here's the problem with prostate cancer. So there's several things that, prostate disease isn't just prostate cancer for starters. It can be just an enlarged prostate, which pretty much all men get if you get old enough, okay? And which is going to cause symptoms of urine problems, okay? So with regards to, you've got to have a test that is safe, okay? It's got to be effective at picking up the disease. It's got to not be unsafe, as in it's not going to cause further problems, okay? So we're balancing all these things in order to find a safe screening program, okay? So one thing many people know about is PSA testing, prostate-specific antigen, okay? And very often you'll find leaflets around, in the supermarket saying, we're offering free prostate-specific antigen testing for any men over the age of 40. And there's a lot of the prostate charities do that. Sometimes it's some of the specialist doctors from the hospital doing that. But it's controversial because actually prostate-specific antigen testing reveals a lot of people with elevated prostate-specific antigen levels who haven't got prostate cancer. Okay? So it's not a great test to say you've definitely, okay, if you come back and these levels are raised, you've definitely got prostate cancer. What it does do is subject you to further testing, okay? So what's the further testing? The further testing, and this is changing, but back when I was working in urology at the hospital as a junior doctor, it used to be a biopsy. But how do you biopsy the prostate? It's up the back passage. So you're putting a needle through your rectum into the prostate, okay? Which, yes, is going to give you a tissue diagnosis, but it's also going to risk putting dirty into clean. And people get septicemia and die from this, okay? So you can see what you were saying from Malcolm Kendrick saying, sometimes we over-diagnose these things. And actually, if you've got an elevated result, and you go and you never had prostate cancer at all, but you go for the test and you end up getting septicemia and possibly dying from it, that's a very, very bad thing. Okay? So, yes, there is no screening program for prostate cancer because we don't have those accurate tests that are safe. So, really, however, on an individual basis, it's very different because if you're having, and certainly if you're having symptoms, okay, and so the prostate goes around the urethra and, inside you, and if you starts to enlarge in any way, then it will start to compress on the urethra. So you get a change in passing urine symptoms, okay? So you will be able to say, look, things have changed here. Is
this one of the reasons why GPs and doctors quite often ask that question as you're going, are you still going to the toilet? As you get to know your patients, last time you were here, you said you go to the toilet once in the middle of the night. It's still has that pattern changed at all? Is that one of the reasons you asked that
absolutely.
question?
So we're looking to pick up both symptoms of prostate cancer and symptoms of an enlarged prostate, because actually, prostate cancer obviously has. It can be very variable. Some people get a really good prognosis from it. Some people obviously have a very, very bad prognosis. But actually, living with, not being able to pass urine very easily is also, a pretty significant cause of unhappiness. The fact that you might need to spend 10 minutes trying to pass urine, or having to get up 3 or 4 times during the night and not having proper sleep, they're pretty. Also very important things that we need to pick up on. So it's not just prostate cancer, but very, very important message. If you're noticed a change in your pattern of urination as a man, yeah, you definitely need to go and see your doctor about that, because there's definitely things that we need to go and try and test, okay? And that might be a time when we go and actually do a physical prostate exam, okay? And so what we're trying to feel for, it should feel like basically like a peach. So it's got a slight dimple in it. Now, if that's just enlarged, you start to lose that central dimple, okay? So that's a nice, simple, enlarged prostate that many men get as they grow older. Now, if it feels lumpy or craggy or abnormal, then that might be something that we say, well, we need to do some further testing. So that would probably be a referral onto a urologist under what we call the 2-week wait, which is a suspected cancer wait, okay? The other thing that complicates things is, once we've done a prostate examination, that will automatically raise the PSA levels in many people. So if you have a blood test for your prostate levels, after you've had an examination, it's probably going to be elevated as well. So anything that can cause that, and even constipation and stuff can start to impact on those levels. So yeah, they're not good tests, okay? And you shouldn't be having, so the question was, at what age should you be starting to have prostate examinations? Well, really, it's not something we ever do on a routine basis. It's not something we offer as part of a screening program. Yes, of course, if you ask your doctor and you're worried about it, particularly if you've had a change in your habits, then it's definitely something that we should be getting checked. But it's not something that is offered, or probably shouldn't be offered as a screening tool.
What I thought would be a quick question actually is turning out to be a long answer, because I've now got 2 more questions off the back of that, and an observation. I'll do the observation first. The reason I have that as part of my medical, I've been paranoid about cancer for about 25 years, because that's what 3 of my 4 grandparents died of. My auntie died of it at 55, and as you know, I've got some very close friends that have died of cancer, and a few that are living with it. So being paranoid about it is one of the reasons I've always had the screening. But actually thinking about it now, even though I've only just had a prostate check a couple of weeks ago, I'm a lot less paranoid about cancer today than I was before I started the Primal movement, because I do believe many strands of it can be avoided by doing all the things we talk about at Primal, how you exercise, how you eat, and so on and so forth. But put that on one side, I want to ask 2 questions. First question is, with things like testicular cancer, breast cancer, we're told to do our own tests. I think I know the answer, but it'd be good to share with everybody. It's not really anything you can do yourself physically to check your own prostate, and nor should you really, I would have thought.
I'm sure there's some videos on YouTube about how you can actually do self-examinations, but no, it's not something I'd recommend.
That you're not going to go to your GP and him say, well, you should have been checking that yourself.
No, because, okay, so with things like testicular examination, you get to know what's normal for you, okay? But it takes a long time as doctors, as medical students, most of what we're doing is examining to learn what's normal, okay? So that when something is obviously abnormal, it jumps out at you, okay? So you listen to, 1,000 normal heart sounds for every abnormal heart sound you pick up, and then it becomes second nature that you pick up abnormal. You feel 1,000 tummies to pick up 1 or 2 abnormals, things, and the same with prostates. So it's about learning what your normal is and what normal is for people. So that's a lot harder to do with your prostate. So that's a great answer,
isn't it? So first of all, don't think that you should be doing anything yourself at the moment, other than if you're seeing symptoms of changing your pattern of how you get when you go to the toilet, things like that. But actually self-checks, forget it. This is not something you do with prostate. That's the first question. I kind of knew the answer, a bit rhetorical, but I wanted to get that across. Secondly, we talk a lot, and a lot of questions that you ask are, is it hereditary? Is it in the genes? Is prostate cancer something that if granddad had it, dad had it, I should take more care over and ask more often? Or is this, again, one that's not really hereditary and look more for the symptoms?
So there's not a clear pattern in the same way as there would be for certain breast cancers that, if mum or auntie or someone had got it, then you're at significantly higher risk of it. But yes, it's with pretty much all cancers, there is a family component, but how that actually links into inheritance is much more complicated. Now, men, we know this from post-mortem examinations, if you actually look at the prostate examination on post-mortem, people in their 90s, there'll be about 90% of men in their 90s will have some abnormal cells within their prostate. That doesn't mean they've got prostate cancer.
Sure.
But basically, what the inference is from that is, if you live long enough, you're pretty much going to get prostate cancer or some abnormal cells. You know, if we all live to 120, 130, then probably most men would get some form of prostate cancer. Well,
I think that was a great question and an even better answer from you for all of that. So
told you it would be quick.
Yeah, that's great done. Next question I have is from Robert. Robert says, I've been suffering with fatigue and inability to sleep, so I visited my GP and just some blood tests done. The results have shown that I have a deficiency in magnesium, and I would like to better understand what foods I should be eating. Oh, why didn't you say ask the guy that loves talking about magnesium rather than ask the doctor? But let's start with the doctor.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, magnesium deficiency, we don't look at it, look for it that much, but we do occasionally start looking for magnesium deficiencies. Magnesium's a really, really important thing in the body. It's involved in, I think, 200 or 300 different
plus, yeah,
reactions within the body. It's important for how our bones develop, things like calcium, phosphate, and they're all very much linked in together. So we definitely want to have good levels of magnesium. Now, the problem with magnesium is it's mostly stored inside the cells. Okay, so actually, if you go and do a blood test, that really doesn't tell you a lot about how much is inside of blood cells. Okay, and it's the same thing with potassium. Okay, sodium and potassium are the ones we commonly test in our blood. Sodium is mainly in the blood, potassium is mainly in the cells. And actually with things like magnesium deficiency, it's quite a late sign for magnesium levels in the blood to be low. And this is one of the reasons we're just starting to think, hang on, is magnesium involved in heart disease? But the problem is we haven't got really good tests for magnesium deficiency, and we reckon that with the decline in magnesium within the soil, we're starting to get far less magnesium from our food. I think there's one study that looked at magnesium levels in food in the 1940s, just in salad crops, and it's something like 1/10, maybe even less, that we get in terms of magnesium from those foods. So we do have a problem here in terms of, first of all, diagnosing magnesium deficiency. It's probably a lot more common than we think it is, probably at a subclinical level before it actually starts causing real symptoms. And yeah, we probably need to be doing something about it in terms of improving the soil crop as well. I know there's a lot of farmers who are quite interested in, what is really happening with degradation of the soil. But foods that can contain good amounts of magnesium, first of all, your green leafy vegetables, nuts, seeds, fish, meat, all the good stuff that we
always
recommend. Whole foods,
Whole foods, yes, magnesium, I believe, is a problem, and I think many people are deficient in it. Dr. Danny just said, the soil is not the soil that we experienced years and years ago. So just think about evolution and the way the body has become the body that it is today, and think about the fact that over 300 different functions in the body now rely on magnesium. And if you aren't getting the amount of magnesium that we used to get, so you can eat, and it's one of the few of all the vitamins and the minerals where there's a European, in fact globally recognized minimum amount we should get. It's one of the very few that you actually can't, well, I believe you can't get sufficient amounts almost from food alone. So in other words, we know how much vitamin C we can get, and actually if you eat all the things that contain vitamin C, no problem, tick, done. Vitamin D, well, we know if we go out in the sun enough and the right amount of exposure to the sun, we can synthesize enough vitamin D, done, check, etc, etc. But magnesium seems to be the one. And I love nearly all the things that have it in. So I love my nuts, I love my fish, and so on and so forth. But even if I ate everything I know I should, I'm going to struggle to hit the minimum amount of magnesium. So it's the one supplement that I almost recommend to every single adult that they take is magnesium. It's one of the supplements that I take in the evening, not the morning, for that very reason. It can be associated with helping get a good night's sleep. And the thing to do with all of these things, and I'm just a little plug for Primal here, which I'm not supposed to do because it's an Ask the Doctor program. One of the reasons we only do 30-day supply on every single vitamin and mineral, because some people do a whole year supply, just try it. Try it for 30 days, see what happens. But alongside that, try and make sure your room's dark. Try and make sure you're not doing the gadgets last thing at night. Try and do all the, make sure the room's not too warm. There's a dozen other things that you can do to help get a good night's sleep, and I think we've touched on that in a lot of programs. But without doubt, magnesium is associated with getting a good night's sleep, and there's every chance that many more people watching, not just, where are we, Robert, are actually deficient with magnesium. Right, we're coming toward the end of today's show, and I'm just going to turn over the page. The next question we have is from Linda. I am a self-confessed chocoholic and just have an overall sweet tooth. You're not actually a chocoholic, it's probably your gut bacteria that's a chocoholic and telling you what to eat, so don't beat yourself up too much. I have been watching Primal Cure and really do wish to take better care of my health, starting with reducing how much sugar I have. Please can you tell me how to reduce my sugar cravings? Linda.
So, there's two different ways of going about this. I definitely prefer one than the other. One is starting to cut down slowly. The other one is going cold turkey, okay, and just completely going without sugar. I'm definitely in favour of number two, because actually I think going, just generally starting to cut down can be really, really difficult to do. I mean, it's almost like it's like sugar is like a gateway drug. You start to take one bit, and then you find you're craving more. And I find that, I'm generally pretty sugar-free these days, but if on a special occasion I'll go out and have lunch and stuff, and I'll have like a dessert that's sweet, then I'm going to be wanting to crave that through the day. And so one of the things that I found, so I think cutting off completely is much easier than actually cutting down. And yes, you're going to go through some withdrawal symptoms in the first few days because it's a drug. It has really profound impact on the brain. But actually that's going to be a lot easier than just cutting down slowly. So yeah, I think, but sugar addiction is a very, very real thing. I mean, talking about different drugs, things that we think about as drugs of addiction, cocaine and heroin and things like that. We've got certain criteria that we use, with people who are substance abusers to say, have you got a problem with substance abuse? And so questions, I think we could kind of go through some of these with people at home. Do you consume the substance in more of an amount than you think? And I think a lot of people, particularly with chocolate and stuff, will say, oh, I just want I'm just going to eat 2 squares, and then the whole of the bar has gone. Okay, I think this is a very common experience for people. Do you ever go out of your way to procure the substance? And you can see people with cocaine and heroin going out of their way, but have you ever driven to the supermarket just to get a bar of chocolate? And I think a lot of people would say yes. Okay, has it ever caused a problem within your family? Have people, and particularly with alcohol and things like that, have people said you need to cut down and then you haven't, and it's caused problems? But people often put a lot of pressure on themselves to cut out things like chocolate, and it can cause arguments within the home. Do you get withdrawal symptoms when you don't have it? I think a lot of people do get withdrawal symptoms, and they kind of need their fix. So yeah, there's all these things they do. I mean, specifically the manual that we use for diagnosing substance abuse says, this doesn't apply to food, but a lot of the same things apply to sugar for a lot of people. And I think that actually, if we open that up, we would find a lot of people who could have a diagnosable food addiction. Yeah. I mean, how many times have you talked to people about this and they've said, oh, I could never live without bread? Well, if you said that to people about smoking, you know, and they say, I can never live without cigarettes, well, you'd say, well, it's because you're addicted. And yeah, we talk about low carb diets to people, and people go, oh, I can never live without bread, I can never live without pasta. Well, that's addiction by another name when we really think about it.
Sure. And Linda, this is a great question, and we're going to try and we can't answer it in just a few moments. I think Dr. Dunn has just touched on some really good points. Let me just take this in a slightly different direction. First of all, I'm a self-confessed chocoholic. First of all, it's not chocolate that's the problem, it's the sugar in the chocolate. So for example, if you read my book or many other books, actually chocolate itself is full of antioxidants, and the cocoa beans are absolutely great. So if you go for a really dark chocolate that you can buy now in most supermarkets and check the sugar content in there, if it's like 80% plus, actually chocolate's healthy. So it's not the chocolate that's the problem, it's the sugar that is the problem. And sugar is completely addictive. And I think what we're starting to realize now is that even our gut bacteria, we can, and this sounds totally off the wall, a bit stupid and a bit crazy, but I try and tell everybody this at the beginning to try and help them get off sugary food, is that the type of bacteria you've got in your stomach can send, I believe, signals to the brain to tell you to eat more of it. So it's actually a bacteria that's getting you addicted to it, because they need more of that, because that type, that strain, there's one called Firmicutes. Firmicutes need sugar to survive, and food that turns into sugar, otherwise their whole strain could die off in the stomach. So first of all, there's a lot of things working against you. And do you go cold turkey? Do you cut back? I think the key thing to realize is what turns into sugar in the body. So have a good read of Primal Cure, read any of the books by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, read John Udwin, who was or even read the Banting diet, which goes back into the 1800s, the first diet book ever written. You have to realize what turns into sugar in the body and try and cut those right back. And it might be that you can't cut the chocolate out straight away, but maybe you go, well, actually, I could live without bread. I have it every day, but I could live without it. Maybe just start there and see the effect, because bread turns into sugar, pasta turns into sugar, rice turns into sugar inside the body. So try and cut maybe the easy wins out first and start to see what it does to the way you feel, the way you look. And when you start looking great and feeling great, you start to realize that actually it's the sugar that's the problem. And then if you can cut all the other things out and you're still eating lots of sugar, try then to go for the more healthy chocolate bars, the 80 plus pure chocolate. And we could talk all day about this, Linda, because in fact the whole Primal Cure movement is about trying to avoid sugar and helping everybody realize that it is an addiction, and it is addiction really no different to that of cigarettes or alcohol or substances that you take in different ways. But the point is that I think 100 years from now, we will view the people that put sugar in foods, like the Coca-Colas and people like this, in a very similar light to Marlboro cigarettes and Philip Morris and the people that make cigarettes and so on and so forth. It's just that we're not yet there yet, because there's so many people trying to hide the fact that it is sugar that is causing all our problems.
Couldn't agree more.
Right, our final question today is from Mark. It says, we recently mentioned Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. Mark says, I watched Dr. Malcolm Kendrick on the cholesterol myth and salt hypothesis, which tells us to reduce our salt intake for better health, which, as Dr. Malcolm Kendrick has, I believe, quite rightly stated, doesn't make any sense at all. I am, however, still being told by my GP that reducing salt is the way forward, and have numerous debates with both friends and even family who I'm trying to help. Please, can you advise the best way to explain this to them? So let me just try and cut that down into what Mark is saying. There is still a lot of medical advice that says we should cut down the amount of salt that we have, but then there's also many other doctors, like Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. We were just talking about a book we've both read called The Salt Fix, which completely arguments the opposite way, that actually, a lot of people say cut salt down really for one thing only, which is to cut down CVD and the risk of heart attacks, because they believe that salt increases blood pressure. But then there are other people like Dr. Malcolm Kendrick and other leading doctors that say, well, actually you can, if you really starve the body of salt, and like really cut down salt way too low, actually you increase your heart rate. And actually, if you look at total mortality, in other words, dying of many different things, that actually cutting down salt decreases lifespan, not increases lifespan. But with Dr. Dan, so let's get Dr. Dan's opinion on something that, you know, you get 100 GPs, you'll probably get 100 different answers.
So I think the answer is, how do we change kind of medical consensus, if you like? I think that's a $1 million, $1 billion question. Yeah. How long have we got?
Well, it's today only $1 billion, because I've just been researching this. The salt industry is globally $14 billion, but the vast majority of salt doesn't go into food. So actually, in terms of billions, compared to sugar, which is up there, I think at 90 billion industry, the salt industry is a tiny industry. So yeah, and another thing I read recently is that one of the reasons the sugar industry has tried to stop us eating so much salt is that the more salt there is in the diet, the less likely we are to get addicted to sugar, because they kind of counterbalance each other.
They do, yeah.
So if you're part of this massive conglomerate, this association promoting sugar around the world, you actually want to suppress salt. And because sugar is this massive industry and the salt, as in food that we eat, salt is very, very small, I think the sugar guys have told us and made all this research, you know, very lopsided to get us to cut down salt. But you're the GP and I'm just a businessman who's written a few books on health. So tell me what your view is.
Yeah, so I think Mark is saying, you know, I have these beliefs, I've read these books, you know, and you know they are the same beliefs that we have and share here. But this goes for so much further than just salt. I mean, I was chatting about this with Malcolm Kendrick the other day, and you know what we want as GPs is to have good guidance that we can trust, and we can say, look, that's been thoroughly researched, that's been thoroughly vetted by a number of different professionals, and therefore when we say, you know, the guidelines are that you should be giving statins to everybody pretty much over the age of 60, you know, that's law, really. You know, there's good evidence base in that. But medicine just isn't. Sorry,
before we go too far, you're not saying everybody should take statins?
No.
That's good.
No.
Good.
But this is, you know, this is the problem is, you know, can we trust our guidance? And I think for a lot of the time we can't. And there's many different conflicts of interest that come in here, as you've alluded to, with the sugar industry, the food industry, the pharmaceutical companies. You know, a lot of these guys have strong influence in how these guidelines are produced. Hopefully, you'd hope that they don't, and that the government would go, you know, we need to be getting these from just scientific experts. But, you know, a lot of the scientific experts are being funded by these, you know, big food and pharmaceutical companies. I remember going to a diabetes conference about 2 years ago, and the lead person who was talking about nutrition put up at the beginning of her presentation her list of sponsors, which certainly have included, and I think it's now defunct, British Sugar, PepsiCo, and various, you know, you get the idea. But
I know exactly where you're coming from.
So, and these people, you know, when they're challenged about it, they will go, well, you know, these are unrestricted grants, therefore I get the money and I can do really what I want with it. And actually, if it means that I say that sugar is bad, then, you know, I can say that if I want, because that's the way the grant's set up. But it's not just one grant, is it?
Yeah.
It's the grant after that, and the grant after that.
There's a phrase, isn't there? You don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So if you're funded by the sugar industry or somebody that relies on sugar, and you're asked to do a research paper, and even if you've been paid for it, you want to get it published, because that's how you get the next bit of work. You're going to try and do everything you possibly can to get the outcome that the funders want you to get.
Yeah, because you want funding from them again and again and again. If you're that person that is, you know, saying, no, sugar's terrible, carbs are bad, etc., and you're being sponsored by, you know, and most of the food companies are owned by the big 5 or 6 companies when you actually start looking up the chain, you know, you don't want that reputation as a troublemaker, because you want to make a career out of this. And so, yes, you will hear these people say that they are not being influenced because they've got this grant structure set up in that way. I don't believe it for a second, Steve.
Yep.
I do not believe it for a second. And so you really have to be careful with where the advice is coming from. Diabetes UK, not to be confused with diabetes.co.uk, which is a different organisation which is very heavily pro low carb,
yep,
are sponsored by one of the world's major food and drink manufacturers who actually manufacture drinks that have even more sugar in than Coca-Cola.
Let's just touch on that for a second. This does relate to salt, by the way, because this is hopefully sowing the foundations to something we're going to say in a second. There are two big diabetes organisations in the UK. One of them agrees with pretty much everything we're saying, which you've got to cut down your carbohydrates because that's the problem. It's all about insulin resistance. Insulin is created to deal with carbohydrates and avoid sugar inside the body. Therefore, you need to cut down the root cause of the problem. The other diabetes organisation in the UK, I don't know which one has the most members, but the other big one is funded by people that make their money out of sugar or sugary products. And they say it's about a balanced diet. It's about doing more exercise. It's not about the food. As long as you're following the government pyramid, which we think is completely upside down and back to front because of all the wrong research. So here is the point. But let's bring that back to salt. The first thing I would say to Mark, there is an amazing book, believe it or not, just written about salt. It's called The Salt Fix. It's an incredible book. You can find it on Amazon. I don't think we sell it, but you can find it on Amazon. Go and read that, because I read that, and I for years and years and years, I'm a big cook. I love cooking for all my kids, my family. I probably cook a big meal 3 or 4 times a week. I took pride for many years in saying, I never put salt in any of my food. That's what I said to everybody. I never put salt. And then Malcolm was one of the first people who said, actually, no, that's probably completely wrong. And then somebody else told me, and then I think you told me, didn't you? I think you said to me, go and buy The Salt Fix, see what you think. I read that book. And now salt is back on the table at home. Salt is back on. If it needs it in the dish to make it more flavoursome, it's in the dish. Because actually, just common sense says if you live primally, there was more salt in our diet over evolution over the last 2 million years. Way more salt, based on the way we used to preserve things. You know, we used to preserve fish, just the things that we were eating. We had more salt in. We lived near the coast. I know mankind sort of started in the middle of Africa, but as they migrated out, we've lived along coastlines more. So salt in the diet was much more prevalent than it is today. And heart attacks, really, in history, have only really happened when we've started to cut out salt.
I think Mark's question was the second part of it was, how do I convince other people? And how do I convince my doctor that they're wrong?
Buy The Salt Fix.
Yeah, I think
give them the book.
You know, this is. I mean, ultimately, this is what we're doing, isn't it? Is we're trying to raise awareness of these issues, and I think the more people that know about the problems by educating themselves and by you educating yourself as well, you know. It stops becoming a secret anymore, doesn't it? But, you know, and actually I think this is great. The internet is a fantastic disruptor, and I know these videos are all going out on YouTube. It's something that I'm very passionate about as well. You know, the power of the internet to disrupt, and big corporations and big governments don't, you know, when there's people power involved, you know, and the internet has given this power back to the people to share information, and our movement has done so much better since the rise of the internet, social media, YouTube, and all these kind of things that actually, you know, and I contrast it to things like what happened in the Arab Spring, you know, with the fall of Colonel Gaddafi and things like that, where, you know, this was power given back to the people, and you know, the governments can't keep this a secret anymore, really. So I think it's, you know, I share your frustrations, Mark, because it's the same frustrations that I have trying to educate my colleagues who, is brainwashed the right term? I think, you know, it's all we're ever taught. But actually, unless you start opening your mind to new evidence and actually opening your mind to revisiting the old evidence, then you're not doing science justice.
That's a great answer. And remember, there has been some massive U-turns. We were told diesel cars were good for us, and they were told they're bad for us, and actually they are bad for us. It was wrong the first time around. We were told margarine was better than saturated fat, and now margarine, if you look at it, has completely disappeared from the supermarket shelves. My advice is go read the Salt Fix. Salt is back on the menu in my home. I'm sure it will be back on the menu in your home once you've done some more research.